Once upon a time, there was a children's book about an ugly ogre. It was a quaint book with clever rhyming, but not even its author ever expected it would transform into a billion-dollar franchising, with much merchandising, soundtrack sales, and eventually more memes than one can keep straight. This is the story of Shrek. Seriously, it's insane how much of a major aspect of pop culture Shrek eventually occupied, and still does. To fully understand that, let's go back to the beginning. To those only familiar with the animated films, it's fascinating going back to the original book by William Steig that started it all. The only similarities between the book and the film adaptation is that Shrek was an ogre, he met a donkey, and then eventually rescued a princess from a castle who he married. Steig's Shrek was a lot nastier and could breathe fire. He even eats a lightning bolt at one point. Most of the book was told in rhyme, including much of Shrek's dialogue. It's sort of surprising that a thought came to turn it into a movie, as Shrek is hardly what one would call a likable, sellable lead. Although fitting, since Shrek is the Yiddish word for fear. And yet, Steven Spielberg saw the potential and bought the rights with the intention of making a hand-drawn animated film, with Bill Murray as Shrek and Steve Martin as the donkey. Eventually, with the founding of DreamWorks, the project was brought over there, and the first writer assigned was, believe it or not, J.J. Abrams. Abrams wrote the initial treatment, which involved Shrek wanting to be a knight and going on an adventure to fulfill that dream. Meanwhile, Jeffrey Katzenberg made the ambitious decision to make the film using motion capture. This was in the mid-90s, so as you can imagine, the technology was not up to snuff, and they decided to just make it a traditional computer-animated film instead. When Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott were hired to write the script, and Chris Farley signed on to voice Shrek, the story eventually shifted to being about Shrek wanting a swamp of his own. So the story started taking shape. Farley's participation also allowed Shrek to become more likable and sensitive. Sadly, Farley passed away after recording most of his dialogue. A couple of original storyboarded scenes give an idea of what might have been.
Oh, this is another one of those onion things.
No, this is one of those drop it and leave me alone things.
Mike Myers took over the role, resulting in a rewrite and more of an emphasis on the fairytale parodies. While Shrek's Scottish voice has become such a vital part of the character, Myers originally voiced him with his own accent, and you can even hear those recordings on the DVD's Tentacle Goofs reel.
Hey, I'm no one's messenger boy, okay?
With that history out of the way, how does Shrek itself hold up after all these years? Remarkably well, I think. Yes, the fairytale and Disney parodies are funny and all, but what really endears me to the film are the characters. Shrek is an ogre who constantly has to deal with people being repulsed by him, and when he starts talking about how that makes him feel, it's genuinely heartbreaking. That's what makes him connect with Princess Fiona. Even long before he finds out she's also an ogre, they can relate to each other on that level. The script deserves a lot of credit for this, but I don't think Myers gets nearly enough acclaim for his vocal performance. He displays an annoyance at those around him at multiple points, especially with Donkey, but there's a sweetness underneath the exterior that Myers so wonderfully brings out. I'm not the biggest Mike Myers fan, I will admit, but he really brought something different to the table here that I admire. Obviously, the message here is not to judge people by how they look, but there's also a good message displayed about stereotyping, something nicely conveyed in the Ogres Have Layers scene. Shrek, as all of you well know, was a massive success and won the first Oscar for Best Animated Feature. Nowadays, people look back at surprise that it beat Pixar's Monsters, Inc. But I remember the early 2000s clear as day. Shrek was a phenomenon, and DreamWorks instantly capitalized on that. Merchandise, a 3D attraction at Universal Studios, and yes, the sequels. Shrek 2 brought more of an emphasis on the fairytale parodies and pop culture references, and while some of these can be overwhelming at times, the filmmakers still remembered where the heart of the story lay. Shrek and Fiona. We see a Shrek that has somewhat changed thanks to finding true love. While Shrek merely saves Fiona from the castle to get his swamp back from Lord Farquaad, all of his actions in Shrek 2 come not to help himself, but rather out of love for Fiona. You can see him desperately trying to deal with her disapproving father, and even drinks a magic potion just for Fiona. It makes the climax all the more heartwarming. Like its predecessor, Shrek 2 is mostly remembered for the parodies, but I keep coming back to it for these two ogres. Shrek the Third seemed like a case of running out of ideas. It seemed unsure of what to do with the characters. Shrek in particular recedes back to doing things for his own gain, rather than out of love for Fiona. The film could have really explored Shrek's fear of becoming a father more, but so much screen time is spent on him trying to bring Arthur to Far, Far Away, Prince Charming's plan to take over the kingdom, and Fiona hanging out with other princesses. The humor just didn't have that same spark, and I felt no affection for anyone on screen. It's telling that Shrek Forever After more or less ignores Shrek the Third, as it plays very little role in the events there, aside from introducing the little ogre triplets. Admittedly, the first time I watched Shrek Forever After, I dismissed it for lacking the laughs of the first two films, and felt going the It's a Wonderful Life plot was a further case that the team at DreamWorks Animation wasn't sure where else to take the characters. However, watching it recently, I appreciated a bit more what they were going for. The parodies and comedy are downplayed a lot more to focus on the drama of the situation Shrek finds himself in, while the central plot device of the alternate universe is used to show how far Shrek will go to regain Fiona's love. The way they get Shrek to agree to Rumpelstiltskin's contract is rather contrived and contradicts one of the most important scenes in the first film. Shrek expresses rather clearly he dislikes that people run away from him and don't get to know him, so it's odd for him to be nostalgic for those days. That aside, Shrek Forever After gets pretty emotional at times. Revisiting all four films recently, it hit me how much the journey of the movies is not about Shrek, but rather the relationship that grows between Shrek and Fiona. These two are incredibly sweet together, with Forever After highlighting just how much these two are meant to be together. It's through Fiona that Shrek becomes less cynical and finds more joy in the world. I think Shrek and Fiona is one of the greatest screen couples of all time. Really. There are rumors of DreamWorks resurrecting the franchise, and if they do, I hope they remember the focus should remain on Shrek and Fiona's love for each other, with the pop culture references remaining secondary. Once these memes die down and people watch these films unironically again, I think we'll see a reevaluation and understanding of why Shrek was such a phenomenon. See you next time.